There is a mistake people make every single day when dealing with patient empaths. A mistake so common that most don't even realize they're making it. At first it seems harmless, small, insignificant. But over time it becomes one of the biggest reasons relationships fall apart, trust gets destroyed, and people lose someone they never thought would leave. The mistake is this: they confuse patience with permission. And if you're an empath, you've probably seen this happen more times than you can count. Because patient empaths are often some of the most misunderstood people in the world. People see their kindness and assume weakness. They see their understanding and assume tolerance. They see their forgiveness and assume endless chances. And that's where the problem begins. Because patience is not the same thing as acceptance. Just because an empath remains calm doesn't mean they aren't paying attention. Just because they don't react immediately doesn't mean they aren't affected. And just because they continue showing up doesn't mean nothing is changing inside them. In fact, some of the biggest emotional shifts happen silently, without warnings, without dramatic confrontations, without obvious signs, and by the time other people notice, it is often far too late. Think about a tree during a storm. From the outside, it may appear strong and unmoved. The trunk remains standing. The branches remain attached. Everything looks fine. But beneath the surface, stress is building. Pressure is building. Damage is building. And eventually, one final storm arrives. People look at that final storm and assume it caused the collapse. But the truth is that collapse was building long before anyone noticed. The same thing happens with patient empaths. Most people only notice the ending. They don't notice the months or years leading up to it. They don't notice the countless disappointments, the ignored conversations, the broken promises, the repeated patterns, the emotional exhaustion, because empaths often process these things quietly. They don't always announce every hurt. They don't always demand immediate attention. They don't always create conflict when something bothers them. Instead, they observe, they reflect, they try to understand, they give people the benefit of the doubt. And unfortunately, this is where many people become careless, because when consequences don't arrive immediately, people often assume there won't be any consequences at all. A person forgets an important promise. The empath forgives. A person speaks disrespectfully. The empath remains calm. A person ignores boundaries. The empath tries to explain. Again and again, patience is offered. Understanding is offered. Grace is offered. But something dangerous begins happening. The other person starts seeing these responses as normal, expected, guaranteed. Instead of appreciating patience, they start depending on it. Instead of respecting kindness, they start exploiting it. Instead of valuing understanding, they start assuming it will always be there. And assumptions can destroy relationships faster than almost anything else. Because appreciation requires awareness. Assumptions eliminate awareness. The moment someone starts believing an empath will always forgive, always understand, always stay, they stop treating those qualities like gifts. They begin treating them like obligations. And nothing drains an empath faster than feeling taken for granted. What makes this especially dangerous is that empaths rarely reach their limit quickly. If they did, people would recognize the warning signs. But patient empaths often continue trying long after others would have walked away. They continue communicating, continue hoping, continue investing, continue believing things can improve. From the outside, everything appears fine. The relationship survives, the friendship survives, the connection survives. But survival is not the same thing as health. A relationship can survive while trust slowly disappears. A friendship can survive while resentment quietly grows. A connection can survive while emotional distance increases. And because these changes happen gradually, they often go unnoticed. The empath notices them, but the other person frequently doesn't. This creates one of the most painful experiences an empath can have. Feeling unseen. Not because people don't know them, because people stop paying attention. The empath may express concerns repeatedly, may communicate needs repeatedly, may explain feelings repeatedly, yet nothing changes. Eventually, they begin realizing something difficult. The issue is not misunderstanding, the issue is lack of action. And once an empath reaches that conclusion, something begins shifting inside them. At first, the shift is subtle, almost invisible. They stop repeating themselves, stop explaining every feeling, stop chasing every conversation, stop trying to convince people to care, not because they stopped caring, because they are tired of investing energy into situations that remain unchanged, tired of carrying emotional responsibility for relationships that require two people, tired of hoping effort will eventually be reciprocated. This is often the stage where others become confused, because the empath seems quieter, more distant, less reactive. But what they're witnessing is not indifference, it's evaluation. The empath is taking a step back and asking questions. Questions they may have avoided for years. Am I being respected? Am I being valued? Am I being heard? Am I receiving the same effort I continue giving? These questions are powerful because they force honesty, and honesty often reveals things that hope tries to hide. The empath starts seeing patterns more clearly, not isolated incidents. Patterns. Patterns of neglect, patterns of inconsistency, patterns of broken trust, patterns of one-sided effort, and patterns are difficult to ignore once they become visible. This is where the dangerous mistake becomes obvious. People assumed patience meant permanence. They assumed forgiveness meant unlimited chances. They assumed understanding meant endless tolerance. But they failed to realize something important. Patience has limits. Not because the empath becomes cruel, because they become aware of what they deserve, aware of what is changing, aware of how much they have been carrying, and awareness always changes the equation. The moment an empath becomes fully aware of an unhealthy pattern, the relationship enters a completely different stage. Because now, they are no longer focused on fixing the situation. They are focused on understanding whether the situation is worth saving at all. And that realization is far more significant than most people understand. Because once a patient empath reaches that point, the outcome is often closer than anyone realizes, including the people who assumed the empath would never leave. Because once a patient empath reaches that point, the outcome is often closer than anyone realizes, including the people who assumed the empath would never leave. And this is where the most dangerous mistake reveals its true cost. People become so accustomed to the empath's patience that they stop recognizing its value. They stop noticing the effort, stop noticing the understanding, stop noticing the emotional labor happening behind the scenes. The empath becomes predictable, not as a person, as a source of forgiveness, a source of support, a source of second chances. And when something becomes predictable, people often stop appreciating it. Think about something simple, a light switch. Most people never think about it until the light stops working. Then suddenly they realize how much they depended on it. The same thing happens with patient empaths. Many people don't fully recognize their value until the empathy is no longer available, until the patience runs out, until the understanding disappears, until the empath quietly decides they can no longer continue carrying the weight alone. And by then, panic often replaces complacency, because the change feels sudden. But to the empath, it was never sudden. It was gradual, built from hundreds of moments, hundreds of observations, hundreds of disappointments, each one small enough to dismiss individually, but together, impossible to ignore. This is what makes patient empaths so different from highly reactive people. Reactive people often reveal their limits immediately. Patient empaths reveal their limits eventually, and that eventually catches people off guard. The other person looks back and wonders, what happened? Why are they different now? Why aren't they responding the same way? Why do they seem emotionally distant? The answer is usually simple. The empath became exhausted, not physically, emotionally. Emotionally exhausted from giving understanding without receiving it. Emotionally exhausted from offering grace that was never appreciated. Emotionally exhausted from carrying responsibilities that never belonged to them in the first place. One of the greatest misconceptions about empaths is that they leave because of a single event, a single argument, a single betrayal, a single disappointment. Sometimes that happens, but more often the final event is merely the final confirmation, the final piece of evidence, the final reminder that nothing is truly changing. It's not the event itself. It's what the event represents. A pattern. A pattern the empath has been watching for a very long time. Imagine filling a glass with water, one drop at a time. Eventually, a single drop causes the glass to overflow. People see the last drop and blame it, but the overflow wasn't caused by one drop. It was caused by everything that came before it. The same principle applies to patient empaths. The final moment isn't usually the reason they leave. It's the moment they finally accept what they've been seeing all along. Acceptance is powerful, because acceptance ends denial. It ends rationalization. It ends endless hope that refuses to look at reality. And once reality becomes impossible to ignore, the empath begins changing in ways that surprise everyone around them. They stop arguing, stop defending themselves endlessly, stop trying to make people understand things they clearly don't want to understand. At first glance, this looks like surrender, but it's actually strength, because the empath is no longer wasting energy on battles that lead nowhere. They are redirecting that energy toward themselves, toward healing, toward clarity, toward peace. And peace becomes incredibly attractive after years of emotional chaos. This is another reason people misjudge patient empaths. They assume patience comes from weakness. In reality, patience often comes from strength. It takes strength to stay calm during conflict, strength to listen when you're frustrated, strength to forgive when you're hurt, strength to continue believing in people after disappointment. But strength can become exhaustion when it is constantly demanded and rarely appreciated. Eventually, even the strongest person reaches a point where they ask an important question: what am I receiving in return? Not because relationships should be transactional, because healthy relationships require reciprocity, respect, effort, consideration, mutual investment. Without those things, patience slowly turns into depletion, and depletion eventually creates distance. The empath starts protecting their energy, protecting their time, protecting their emotional well-being. Not because they suddenly care less, because they finally care about themselves too. That is often the moment people become alarmed. The empath who once tolerated everything suddenly has standards. The empath who once explained everything becomes quiet. The empath who once chased connection begins stepping back. The old dynamic stops working, and people who benefited from that dynamic often don't know how to respond. Some try guilt, some try promises, some try temporary change. Some try reminding the empath of the past. But the empath sees things differently now, because awareness has replaced assumption, reality has replaced hope, and self-respect has replaced self-sacrifice. This is why the most dangerous mistake people make with patient empaths is assuming their patience is unlimited. It isn't. No one's is. Patience is a gift, not a guarantee, a privilege, not an obligation. The healthiest people understand this. They appreciate patience rather than exploit it. They value kindness rather than depend on it. They respect understanding rather than take advantage of it, because they recognize something many people learn too late. The patient empath is not staying because they have no other option. They are staying because they are choosing to. And choices can change, especially when appreciation disappears, especially when respect disappears, especially when effort disappears. Eventually, every empath reaches a moment where they stop asking how to save the relationship and start asking how to save themselves. That moment changes everything, because once self-preservation becomes the priority, the relationship can never return to what it was before. The empath begins moving toward something they may have neglected for years, their own peace, their own happiness, their own well-being. And once they discover how peaceful life feels without constantly carrying the weight of other people's choices, something remarkable happens. They stop looking back. Not because they became heartless, not because they stopped caring, but because they finally realized a truth that took years to learn. Patience should never require self-abandonment. Kindness should never require endless suffering. And love should never require one person to carry everything alone. The people who understand this keep patient empaths in their lives. The people who don't often discover the lesson only after the empath is gone, and by then, the patience they once took for granted has become something they can no longer get back.